If you're left behind, then marry my pa." The words tumbled out of a 5-year-old's mouth, her gray eyes shining beneath a tangle of hair, her oversized boots clomping against the dust. On the red-soiled platform of Dust Creek, where Amelia Rowan had sat 3 long days beneath the shame of a false letter, the child's innocent voice cut through like a blade, tearing the fragile armor she had wrapped around herself to withstand the town's scornful stares. Yet amid the gossip and sidelong looks, a tiny hand tugged at her skirt, a tender voice granting her a worth no one had ever spoken aloud. "My pa needs someone. I do too." And in that awkward, startling instant, Dust Creek no longer felt like a prison of ridicule but a turning place, where a forsaken heart stood before the question, had fate just arrived in the form of a child? Amelia Rowan arrived in Dust Creek on a chilly spring morning. The wind swept down from the gray ridges, carrying with it the damp scent of earth and brittle hay, rattling the rusted eaves of the little train stop. It was hardly a station at all, just a narrow wooden shack with a hastily built bench, an iron stove streaked with rust, and a crooked sign swaying out in the yard. The place felt more like a forgotten way station than a gateway to a new life. Yet Amelia, with all her faith tied to a single letter, stepped down without hesitation. In her hand she clutched that folded sheet, its edges soft and crumpled from being held too long. The words, scrawled in black ink and signed Andrew Collins, promised a farmstead near the foothills, a wide-open home, and a new beginning for the woman willing to leave the East and answer the call of the frontier. She had read it so many times the lines had become prayer. But when she held it out to the station master, an old man with wisps of silver hair and a beard like straw, he only shook his head. "No one by that name in Dust Creek," he said, voice carrying both pity and uncertainty. The words cut cold. Amelia pressed him further, pointing to the seal of the marriage agency, but the old man scratched his chin and shook his head again. 40 years running this post, and he had never once heard the name. A few townsfolk, she asked, gave the same answer. Then came the murmurs, spreading from the well to the store porch. Another girl fooled. The third one this year. She still looks like she believes. Poor thing. Amelia heard every word yet answered none. She returned to the bench, clutching her cloth bag, spine straight, as if posture alone could hide the trembling in her belly. That was the first day. Night fell with stronger winds driving fine dust along the streets. The station dimmed to a single oil lamp. The walls creaked beneath the gusts. Amelia pulled her thin shawl tight around her shoulders, leaning against the wall, trying to sleep. The boards were hard, the bench too short, and the wind's whistle through the cracks shredded her dreams. She drifted in and out, half seeing a farmhouse door swinging open, a man beckoning her in, only to wake to lamplight smoke and cold emptiness. On the second day, she pulled from her bag the last scrap of dry bread. Her jaw ached from chewing it down, but she swallowed anyway. People in town began to notice. 1 or 2 offered her a biscuit or a cup of water, though most only watched with mingled pity and curiosity. Sitting near the well, she overheard 2 farm wives whisper, "Foolish thing. Left her kin, left everything, chasing after a page of words." Not low-born either by the look of her. But what good's that now? Amelia turned her face away, biting down on the biscuit until her throat burned with its sharp sweetness. It filled her stomach just enough, but nothing could fill the shame pressing deeper into her chest. She kept silent, letting her disgrace blend into the sound of horses far down the road. That second night, the temperature dropped. Dew beaded on the eaves and fell in soft plinks to the floor. The station master, moved by her stubborn waiting, urged her inside, nearer to the stove's dying coals. He pressed a tin cup of weak tea into her hands, its faint warmth fogging her cheeks. "Train east won't be for 2 more days," he muttered. Amelia only nodded, eyes fixed on the window where the dark pressed heavy against the glass. By the third morning, her face had grown hollow, lips cracked, hair matted from sleepless nights. The back of her dress bore the dust of the bench, her once neat bun falling in wild strands. As she stepped onto the porch, the whispers rose again. Who's she waiting for now? Still thinks that man's real, maybe. Naive to the bone. Amelia caught each word, but gave no retort. She sat, hands folded on her knees, gaze set on the rails stretching into the horizon. She knew now, it was all a cruel trick. Andrew Collins had never lived, never waited, never written. The letter was nothing but a lie, and yet her feet would not carry her away. Some voice deep within murmured, "At least wait for the next train, then leave, then admit defeat." That afternoon, the light slanted weak and coppery, painting the dirt street like tarnished coin. Amelia sat still, her cloth bag by her side, the wind tugging at her skirt and stinging her eyes with grit. She blinked, but no tears came. Her weeping had dried up over the long nights. What remained was a face hardened by disappointment, eyes clinging stubbornly to tracks that promised nothing. In that moment she realized she had become a ghost in this town, seen, whispered about, yet never approached. And truth be told, she no longer knew what she waited for. Still she sat, because leaving meant conceding the whole journey had been an illusion. The third night crept in without stars, a ceiling of gray cloud smothering the sky. Amelia curled on the bench inside, clutching her bag, listening to the eaves groan with the wind. Her head rested against the wall, her breath heavy with weariness. Outside, the town sank into sleep, broken only by a dog's bark echoing from afar. 3 days, so short for others, yet to Amelia they stretched like a lifetime. Each hour cut deeper into her hope, carving wounds into her pride. She had come with dreams of a homestead, and found only a splintered bench at a forgotten station. Still, she did not leave. Whether out of defiance or the faintest shred of hope for a miracle, she stayed. And when the pale glow of a fourth dawn began to rise along the horizon, Amelia remained, eyes hollow yet steady, fixed on the emptiness ahead. The train had not come. The man had never existed. But she still had herself and a bench at Dust Creek Station to bear witness to the longest 3 days of her life. The fourth morning at Dust Creek Station broke with a thin, washed-out light that seemed to mirror Amelia's own spirit. A veil of mist lay across the dirt road, beating into droplets on the rusted eaves. She sat silent, fingers laced tightly together, eyes fixed once more on the endless stretch of rails. Inside the shack, the old station master coaxed a flame to life in the iron stove, but the fragile warmth could not draw her back. Amelia had decided. She would wait for the next eastbound train. Wait so it would not look as though she had fled too quickly. Wait so she could grant herself one more breath before admitting defeat. 3 days had drained her of faith and dignity, leaving behind only a shadow hunched in the corner of the station. Meanwhile, Dust Creek carried on with its own rhythm. A cowboy led his horse to the well, A farm wife crossed the street with a basket of eggs. Children raced past the platform, shouting, tossing stones onto the rails until their parents barked them back. No one truly cared about the stranger sitting bowed over her worn cloth bag. Amelia lowered her eyes, drew a breath, and started to rise, ready to retreat inside the station to escape the weight of those watching eyes. But just then she felt the tug of a small hand at her skirt. She looked down, and there stood a girl of about 5. The child wore a faded cotton dress, her hair braided loosely and dust clinging to her face. On her tiny legs sagged a pair of leather boots far too big, clumping with every step as though they belonged to a grown man rather than that little body. She tilted her head back, gray eyes bright with a blend of curiosity and startling honesty. And then, in a voice soft and unguarded, she said the words that made Amelia's breath catch. "If you're left behind, then marry my pa." For an instant, Amelia could not understand what she had heard. The childish words, clumsy and sudden, sliced through the thin armor she had worn against the town's scorn. "What?" The word escaped her lips in a whisper, eyes wide. The girl let go of her skirt, clasped her small hands before her chest, and shrugged as if it were the most natural thought. "My pa don't have a wife. Says he don't need one. But maybe no one ever asked him. If you've been left behind, then marry my pa." Amelia froze. Her heart, numbed by 3 long days of waiting, quivered strangely. Before her stood no man to claim her, no flowery promise on paper, just a dusty little girl in boots too wide. Yet that child, with one awkward phrase, had drawn her back from the edge of despair. She tried to smile, though her lips trembled. "What's your name?" "Lydia," the girl answered simply, plopping down beside her, boots knocking heavy against the planks. With an expression comically stern, she added, "They say you've been left, but I don't think you need to be sad. My pa needs somebody. I need somebody too. That's enough." Amelia blinked, rapidly. Part of her wanted to laugh, part to weep. How long had it been since anyone had told her she was enough for anything? All this journey she had known only pitying whispers and scornful glances. Yet a child, without hesitation, had given her something far rarer: recognition. A memory flickered. Her own girlhood, slipping into her mother's 2 large shoes, running through the house pretending to be older than her years. Looking at Lydia, she saw a reflection of that same stubborn bravery, a child trying to stand tall in a world too harsh. "You came alone?" Amelia asked, her voice rough. Lydia shook her head, wisps of hair falling loose. "Pa's out at the ranch, but I don't like staying home by myself, so I went looking. Then I found you." Amelia said nothing more. She felt the small hand tug her skirt again, holding fast as though afraid she might vanish. Strangely, the warmth of that touch spread through her, waking something she had thought long dead: connection. On the road, a few townsfolk noticed and murmured, but this time Amelia did not bow her head. She let the child's hand cling, let those curious gray eyes meet hers. For she had found something different. No man's false promise, but a thread of belonging, invisible yet strong, binding itself around her heart. Softly, almost only for herself, she whispered, "Perhaps I was never truly left behind." The child did not understand. She only tilted her head and grinned, eyes gleaming, and as a rooster crowed faintly from some far-off ranch, Amelia felt that her 3 long days at Dust Creek had not been nothing. They had been the road that led her here, to this moment when a small hand, inside a pair of boots far too large, placed a new beginning into her keeping. The road from Dust Creek Station to the McKinley Ranch wasn't long, yet to Amelia it felt like crossing into another world. Wind swept down from the ridges, laced with the scent of dry grass and dust, wrapping itself around her skirt and dragging at each weary step. Lydia trotted ahead, the oversized boots clumping against the damp earth, leaving deep imprints with every stride. She never looked back, but her small hand clung to Amelia's skirt, as if afraid the woman might turn and leave. Amelia followed in silence, clutching her worn cloth bag, her mind a storm of doubts. She could not explain why she let a child lead her this way. She should have waited for the train, left town the moment she could. But those gray eyes, that blunt little voice, "Marry my pa," had tied her feet as firmly as any rope. The ranch appeared as the sun dipped westward, a 2-story house, its paint weathered pale, its porch sagging. A barn leaned tiredly against time, boards bowing under long years of strain. Beyond stretched a patchy garden where corn struggled in crooked rows. It was no picture of promise, nothing like the letter's imagined homestead. This was the truth, a place worn thin, much like the man who owned it. "Pa!" Lydia called, her voice ringing across the barren yard, echoing off distant cliffs. The door opened. A man stepped onto the porch. Jacob McKinley, though Amelia did not yet know his name, stood tall, shoulders broad beneath a rolled-sleeve work shirt, his arms sinewed and darkened by sun. His face seemed carved of stone, every line set deep, his eyes dark as coal pits. Weariness etched his features, the kind born not only of years, but of grief. His stance was solid, his shadow stretching long, at once commanding and distant. His gaze flicked first to his daughter, then to Amelia. Cold, not curious, not welcoming, merely the stare of a man too accustomed to closing doors, expecting nothing good to arrive at his threshold. "Pa, this is her!" Lydia cheered, tugging Amelia toward the steps. Jacob's brow furrowed. His voice was low, rough, final. "I never sent a letter to anyone." The words struck like a hammer to her chest. Amelia faltered, feeling the weight of the gulf between them, not measured in steps but in walls built high with loneliness. She gripped the strap of her bag, steadying her voice. "I know," she whispered, though the truth still stung raw. "I don't know why I came. Only, your daughter pulled me here." Jacob didn't answer at once. He only stared, his eyes shadowed, unreadable. Then he turned to Lydia. "You've been running off again." "But Pa," Lydia argued, earnest as ever. "She needs a place, and we need her." He drew in a long breath, chest rising beneath the coarse shirt. No anger, no softening either. Only a silence so thick it pressed against the air. At last he said, with finality that felt like shutting a door, "We don't need anyone." Lydia lowered her head, fingers slipping free of Amelia's skirt. Yet she didn't step away, as though even she doubted her father's words. Amelia lifted her chin, clinging to the last scrap of dignity left after the station. "I understand," she said quietly. "I did not expect to be welcomed. I just have nowhere else to go right now." A gust swept the yard, carrying the dry tang of grass and smoke from some far fire. Jacob braced a hand against the doorframe, eyes turning aside as though refusing to make any choice at all. The porch creaked with the wind, Lydia's faint cough breaking the silence. For the first time, Amelia saw the weight behind his guarded stare. Not suspicion alone, but a hurt so deep it had become habit. Every stranger at his door only a threat to open old wounds. "You can rest in the yard till nightfall," he said at last, voice clipped. "After that, it's up to you." She nodded, offering no protest. She stepped down, settling on the stone step by the yard. The evening stretched golden across the fields, gilding her tangled hair. Lydia sat close, swinging her heavy boots with a hollow thump against the stone. And Amelia understood. This door would not open easily. The widower was no ordinary man. He was sealed as tightly as his weather-worn ranch, stern, closed, and full of unspoken shadows. Yet in his dark eyes, she had glimpsed the faintest ember, a coal not fully dead. By instinct alone, she knew she had stepped onto dangerous ground, not of threat or harm, but of the heart's peril, the kind that could undo her once more. Night settled. A thin crescent moon rose over the ridges, silvering the sagging porch. Jacob went inside, shutting the door without a word. But Lydia stayed, pressed against Amelia's arm, whispering, "Pa only says that. He still needs someone. I know it." Amelia said nothing, her hand brushing through the child's dusty hair. Her heart thudded slow and heavy. Before her stood only a closed house. Yet beside her, a small hand clung still, keeping her rooted. And so beneath the Dust Creek moon, Amelia remained, like one without a home, waiting for a door that might never open. That night, Amelia was given a narrow wooden bed in the empty room at the back of the house. Jacob said little, just opened the door, laid a thin blanket across the frame, and left without another word. The room was bare, the walls gray with age, the window without curtain. The only thing softening its bleakness was the faint scent of pine resin clinging to the old boards. She set her cloth bag in the corner and sat for a long time before unlacing her shoes. She wasn't used to sleeping in strange houses, much less in one where she felt like little more than a tolerated shadow. She should leave in the morning, before her pride wore away further. But exhaustion from those 3 station-bound days pressed her down. The blanket was thin, the night air cold, but even a flat surface to lie upon was mercy enough. The wind moaned through the eaves, mingling with the restless stamping of horses in the barn. Amelia closed her eyes, pushing back the image of the man who had shut his door so firmly. She hadn't come to beg. She only needed a place to see her through till morning. That was all. But with dawn, her resolve unraveled. A faint, ragged breathing came from the room next door. At first, Amelia thought she dreamed it. Then came the small, trembling call, cutting through the hush. "Miss Amelia?" She sat up at once, heart pounding. It was Lydia's voice. Amelia threw on her shawl and followed the sound down the hall. The door stood ajar. Inside, Lydia lay curled on a narrow bed, her face flushed, hair plastered with sweat. Her eyes were shut tight, yet her lips quivered, whispering Amelia's name. Amelia rushed to her side, touching the girl's brow. Heat seared her palm. Fever, strong and dangerous. "Oh, child," she breathed. In her fevered haze, Lydia reached up, clutching Amelia's dress with surprising strength. She did not cry out for her father. She clung only to this stranger she had chosen in a single day. Amelia, startled, still gathered her close. The instinct came unbidden, as though she had always known how to cradle a burning child. Her throat tightened as the small body trembled against her. Footsteps sounded. Jacob appeared at the door, his face drawn tight. His eyes landed on Amelia, a question flashing there. But when he saw Lydia's fists clutching her skirt, something in him faltered. His gaze dropped, shadowed by helplessness. "She's sick?" His voice was low, grating. Amelia nodded, not loosening her hold. "Fever's high. Do you have medicine?" He shook his head, fists clenched. "Some herbs, but she never lets anyone near." He reached toward his daughter, but Lydia whimpered and pressed closer to Amelia, whispering, "Don't leave me." The moment carved itself deep. A father, refused by his own child, watching her seek comfort in another's arms. The pain flickered across Jacob's hard-hewn face, yet he did not force her back. "Do you know what to do?" he asked, voice hoarse. Amelia met his gaze. "I was a schoolteacher, not a nurse, but I know enough." He studied her a breath, then gave a curt nod. "Water and cloths in the kitchen." And just like that, for the first time, he entrusted her with what he held most dear. Through the pale hours of dawn, Amelia worked. She boiled water, soaked rags, pressed the cloths against Lydia's burning skin. She wiped sweat from the child's brow, changed her into a lighter gown. Lydia's small hand never released hers, even in sleep. Jacob stayed at the doorway, silent. He fetched what she asked: more water, wood for the fire, even kept the horses calm so their noise would not wake the sick room. Amelia caught glimpses of his face in the wavering light, not cold now, but unsteady, as though relearning what it meant to trust. Time dragged slow. At last the first beam of sun slipped through the window, touching the bed. Lydia's breathing eased, her body slackened into true sleep. The fever had not broken, but its grip had loosened. Amelia sat with hair disheveled, dress creased, exhaustion etched into her bones. Yet for the first time in days, she felt purpose. Not waiting in shame, not enduring scorn, simply being here, because a child had needed her. Jacob cleared his throat, his shadow stretching long across the floor. "She's never let anyone, not even kin." He stopped, swallowed, and only sighed. Amelia smoothed the damp strands from Lydia's brow. "Children know more than we think. She didn't choose me because I'm special. She chose because she needed someone now." He said nothing. He turned aside, shoulders taut, but his eyes lingered on his daughter, and there was the barest gleam of moisture there. Amelia bent over the child, whispering as if binding herself to a vow. "I'll stay. At least until she's well. Not for Jacob, not for pity, but because when Lydia had called her name in fever, Amelia had felt something change. She was no longer the woman left behind. She had been chosen by a child's innocent, desperate need. And in that damp, fragile dawn, Amelia knew her story in Dust Creek was not over. It had only just begun. The days after Lydia's fever drifted by like a hidden stream, slow, steady, yet strong enough to wear down the hardest stone. Amelia, who had meant only to stay until the child recovered, found herself woven into the rhythm of the household. No one asked her to remain. No command was spoken, yet her hands moved into every small task until her presence felt indispensable. Each morning, with mist still clinging to the fields, Amelia hauled water from the well. The bucket strained her thin shoulders, chilled her hands raw, sometimes splashed her skirts with icy weight. But she never complained. By the time she carried the water in, Lydia would be awake, hair a-tumble, sitting at the rough table waiting. She giggled when Amelia patted cool water across her cheeks, laughter ringing like a bell through a house that had long known only silence. The days filled with nameless labors, stitching Lydia's dresses, patching the work trousers Jacob wore thin, gathering greens from the scraggly garden, sweeping soot from the kitchen hearth. Her fingers blistered on the needle. Her wrists ached from hammering wood. Yet Amelia persevered. Once accustomed to chalk and books, her hands grew calloused in the slow discipline of ranch life. At midday, when Lydia dozed beneath a ragged quilt, Amelia reached for the worn Bible on the shelf. She read not out of devotion, but for the cadence of the words, verses flowing steady, her voice low and warm. The child curled into sleep, as if the scripture were a lullaby, erasing the distance between stranger and kin. Jacob remained a presence like shadow. He left at dawn, returned at dusk, his words clipped as axe strokes. Water, stoke fire, feed hens. Never more than 3 or 4 at once. His tone held no music, no softness. But whenever Amelia obeyed, he neither interfered nor scolded. One afternoon, sweat damp on her brow as she bent at the well, Jacob approached. Without a word, he took the rope, hauled bucket after bucket, then set it back into her hands, a silent acknowledgement. She looked up, meaning to thank him, but he had already turned, his tall figure striding toward the barn. So the days stretched, without drama, without storm. Yet within that quiet, Amelia felt a shift. The house that once echoed only with wind through the boards now held the shuffle of small feet, the murmur of her voice reading, the soft click of needle on wood. Not much, but enough to cover the ashes that lingered. One morning, Lydia insisted on helping. She clutched a basket, followed Amelia into the bean patch. Her boots, still too large, tripped her into the mud. She tumbled, filthy but laughing, the sound so pure Amelia found herself laughing too, an echo of a sound she thought she had forgotten how to make. Jacob, watching from the fence line, did not laugh, but a faint crease by his eye softened, something not entirely stern. Amelia began to notice how Jacob always set the largest portion before Lydia at supper, how each night he paused to straighten her quilt, though he never stepped fully inside, how his gaze lingered when Amelia mended by lamplight, not warm, but no longer indifferent. Still the wall remained. He never spoke thanks, never asked after her needs. They were strangers under one roof, bound only by circumstance. Yet day by day that space filled with small, unspoken gestures. Both felt it, though neither named it. At night, when Lydia slept, Amelia often sat alone by the fire, her hands swollen and raw from the day's work. The flames threw her shadow against the wall, small but steady. Sometimes Jacob passed by the doorway, pausing a moment before walking on. He never entered, never greeted. But she knew he watched, as though her quiet presence was something he could neither accept nor bring himself to dismiss. And for Amelia, that was enough. After the station's humiliation, after the weight of scornful stares, simply being here, working, caring, belonging to the cadence of a household, was a miracle. She was no longer meaningless. One evening, with the sun bleeding red over the ridge, Amelia stood on the porch. She watched Jacob cross the field, carrying a bundle of hay, his figure swallowed in the fire of the horizon. Inside, Lydia sang a crooked little rhyme to herself. In that moment, Amelia understood. This house had once been nothing but cinders, but now, somehow, the outline of a woman's presence had returned to its corners. Not Jacob's lost wife, not a replacement, simply Amelia. Awkward hands, soft voice, rare smile. And Jacob, though silent, bore witness. His eyes, unwilling to admit it, watched her like a man who had noticed a spark kindle again in the ashes. Night fell over Dust Creek with a silence that felt heavier than stone. The wind still whispered through the ridges. An owl cried out in the distance. But inside the wooden house the air thickened, broken only by the flicker of firelight and the steady breathing of a sleeping child. Amelia sat at the kitchen table, her hands raw from a day of stitching. She had just folded Lydia's mended dress neatly on the chair. The lamplight spilled across the scarred boards, stretching her shadow into something long and fragile. Rising, she went to the cupboard in search of a dry cloth. The door creaked as she opened it. Folded linens lay stacked in uneven piles, but beneath them her fingers brushed against something solid. She pulled it out, a small wooden box darkened with age, corners worn smooth, hinges rusted. For a moment she hesitated. She should have put it back, yet her hands moved as if they belonged to someone else, placing the box on the table, lifting its lid. Inside lay dozens of letters folded tight, some never sealed, others yellowed with years. All written in the same steady hand. She slid one free, opened it. I do not know how to live without you, yet I rise each morning because of the child. She has your eyes when she smiles, my silence when she grieves. I cannot tell if that is grace or punishment. I only know. Mornings are the hardest, for that is when you should be here. The ink blurred near the end, as though the words themselves had wept. Amelia pressed her lips tight, the room spinning around her. Each letter a vein of grief. A man's heart bled out on paper, never meant for any eyes but hers. It's gone. Footsteps struck heavy against the floor. She turned sharply. Jacob filled the doorway, the lamplight casting his face into harsh shadow. His eyes darkened when he saw the open box, the letter in her hand. That is not yours. His voice was gravel, strained, like wood splitting in frost. Amelia laid the letter down at once, her fingers trembling. I only meant to find a cloth. I didn't mean. His steps thudded closer. You have no right. No one does. I'm sorry, she whispered. He shut the lid hard, clutching the box to his chest. His jaw was locked tight, every line in his face cut deep. Yet beneath the anger was something raw, a sudden pain laid bare, unguarded. The wall around him cracked. Jacob dropped into a chair, bent over the box, his head bowed. A breath tore from him, heavy as stone. Do you know? His voice broke, shoulders trembling. Do you know how she died? Amelia could not speak. She died giving me Lydia, he said, eyes lifting, bloodshot with memory. The bed was red with it. I held her hand till her last breath. This house has been silent ever since. And I wrote to her. Wrote as if she could still hear me. But I never sent a single word. His voice split on the last line, sharp as a blade. Amelia sat across, hands clenched in her lap, and said softly, I am not here to replace her. I am here simply to be. The words were barely more than breath, yet they struck like a hammer to the fracture. Jacob buried his face in his hands, silent for a long time. The lamp sputtered, casting wavering gold across Amelia's face. She looked at him, not the stone figure on the porch, but a man wounded, hiding his bleeding heart beneath armor. And in that moment, she understood. Her presence, however slight, had touched the deepest scar. No more words passed. Jacob rose, the box still clutched close, and left the room. His steps were slow now, burdened. The door shut behind him. Amelia remained, eyes blurred with tears. On the table, the half-open letter lay abandoned, proof of a pain that time had never sealed. That night, Dust Creek lay more silent than ever. But in the weathered house, a small crack had opened in the wall of ice, revealing that behind the chiseled face still lived a heart, trembling at the presence of another. The McKinley house sank into an unfamiliar silence after the night the box had been opened. It was not the ordinary quiet of wind threading through the boards or embers cooling in the stove, but a heavy hush, like a blanket smothering the rafters. Jacob spoke no word to Amelia, not even a glance. He worked longer hours in the fields, returning later than usual, his presence a wall that shut her out. Amelia felt the distance with every breath. Lydia still clung to her at dawn, still begged for scripture at noon. Yet between herself and the child's father, a towering wall had risen again. The words she had once whispered, "I am not here to replace her. I am here only to be," had not softened the grief carved into him. At night, after Lydia's breathing fell into steady sleep, Amelia sat alone by the fire. She felt like a trespasser, a shadow without place. This house belonged to another woman still, her name lingering in every timber. And Amelia, she was only a mistake, an intruder who had stayed too long. On the third night, she could bear no more. She sat at the table, tore a slip from the old Bible, and scrawled uneven words. "Thank you for shelter. I will trouble you no longer. Keep Lydia safe." She folded the note, set it upon the table, and packed her meager things. The old cloth bag held little: 2 worn dresses, a small book, a broken comb. She folded each with the weary neatness of one accustomed to leaving more often than staying. Outside, the night pressed thick and black over Dust Creek. The moon hid behind clouds. Only the faint lamplight bled through the window. She drew her shawl close, lifted her bag. The hinge whined as she opened the door, stepping onto the porch. The air was damp, cold, the same chill that had wrapped her on the station bench, waiting for a train that never came. Her foot touched the step when a sound broke behind her. Bare feet on wood, a sharp sob. "Miss Amelia!" She turned. Lydia stood in the doorway, hair tumbling loose, eyes shining wet in the lamplight. The child saw the bag in her hand and wailed, "She's my mama now!" The cry tore through the night, freezing Amelia where she stood. For a heartbeat, the whole house seemed to shudder. Jacob emerged from the shadows of the other room, his face marked by sleepless nights. He stopped still at his daughter's words, as though every stone he had stacked into walls around his heart cracked beneath them. Amelia clutched the bag tighter, her pulse wild. "Lydia, no! You're mistaken." Her voice trembled, hoarse. "I cannot stay. I am only—" "No, you are my mama!" Lydia rushed down the steps, arms tight around Amelia's skirt. I don't want you to go. Pa doesn't say it, but he needs you too. I know. Amelia's throat burned. Her hands froze at her sides, then faltered against the warmth of the child clinging to her. She knew she could not deny it. In Lydia's heart, she had already become more than a guest. Jacob stood on the porch, his shadow stretching long. He looked at his daughter, at Amelia, lips trembling but silent. In his eyes, she glimpsed the tearing struggle, the fear of losing again, the hunger to hold on. Mr. McKinley, she began, but her voice broke. I never meant. I only. Jacob drew a ragged breath, his fists clenched. For years he had armored himself, raising his daughter alone in silence. But now, with Lydia's cry, she's my mama now, he felt the walls crumble. He stepped down, each movement heavy with the weight of memory. When he stopped before Amelia, his eyes were no longer hollow pits, but stormed skies, torn and alive. You don't understand, he said softly, voice shaking. I've lost once. I cannot bear to lose again. Amelia met his gaze, her breath unsteady. I did not come to be held onto. I only stayed, so Lydia would never feel abandoned. The child sobbed against her dress, fragile as wings beating against the sorest parts of both their hearts. The wind swept the porch, cold as steel. Yet in that chill, 3 figures stood. One woman poised to leave, one child weeping, one man undone. No more pretense, no more walls, only the shared terror of loss and the desperate wish for belonging. Amelia lowered her bag slowly to the ground. Her hand stroked Lydia's tangled hair. She whispered, Hush now, little one. I'm here. At least, until you no longer fear. Jacob closed his eyes. A single tear carved its way down his worn cheek. And in that dark night on the porch, the truth lay bare. 3 souls bound together by a thread invisible, fragile, but real enough no heart dared deny. The McKinley yard still bore the weight of the words that had just been spoken. Lydia pressed her face into Amelia's chest, her small sobs coming one after another. Jacob stood a few paces away, his features carved deeper by years of wear in a single moment. The wind carried the dry scent of grass and dust, and the silence that followed beat like a second pulse in the air. Just as the wall between them began to crack, the heavy rhythm of hoofbeats thundered from the road. The sound rolled closer, urgent, ominous, like a drum of warning. Amelia and Jacob lifted their heads. A lone rider approached, a tall silhouette against the darkening dusk. The horse halted at the gate, its bit flecked with foam. The rider tipped back his wide-brimmed hat. Fading light revealed sharp planes of a face, eyes dark and unyielding. Nothing of Jacob's weariness in them, only a fierce, unreadable fire. Jacob's hands clenched, shoulders taut. His voice dropped, hoarse and edged. Elias. Amelia startled. The name carried the weight of a curse on the night air. The man on horseback gave a thin smile, cold as flint. Been a long while, brother, Elias said, his tone a mix of mockery and grief. I hear you've buried yourself out here. No wife, no friends, just that child. Jacob stepped in front of Amelia and Lydia, his voice sharp. You've no place here. Elias swung down from the saddle, boots striking the ground with a thud. He brushed the dust from his coat, his gaze sliding over Amelia. A look too long, too piercing. enough to chill her blood. Then he turned back to Jacob, speaking slow. Do you really believe her death was just an accident? The air froze. Amelia's heart pounded in her ears. Lydia looked up, not fully understanding, yet sensing the danger in his voice. Jacob's face darkened, his words clipped. That's enough. But Elias pressed on. The town whispers. They say you did nothing. That when she cried out, you failed to call the doctor. That the bed ran red, and you just sat, powerless. Not an accident, Jacob, a truth you live with. Jacob lurched forward, fists curling, then stopped, chest heaving, eyes burning red. Be silent. Amelia's breath caught. She had never heard the details of Jacob's loss, only his blunt words. She died bearing Lydia. Now the ghost of that night returned, heavier, sharpened by accusation. Elias took a step closer, his eyes cutting like steel. I didn't come to argue, only to remind you, some deaths don't happen by chance. Some are let to happen by human hands. Amelia shivered. Lydia trembled tighter against her. Jacob's voice broke into a growl. Get off this land before I... Elias only shrugged, turned to his horse. I'll go. But remember, darkness doesn't vanish because you shut your eyes. One day, truth will find you. He spurred the animal and vanished down the road, leaving a storm of dust in his wake. The yard fell back into silence. Not the ordinary quiet of nightfall, but the suffocating stillness after fire dies to ash. Jacob stood unmoving, his arms limp, his eyes deep as a pit. Amelia watched him. Not the stern figure on the porch, not the hardened father, but a man cornered by grief, caught between defending his daughter and facing the weight of a curse he could not shake. She stepped forward, laid her hand lightly on his arm. He stiffened at the touch. When he turned, his eyes were a storm of fury, sorrow, and exhaustion, yet laced with something uncertain, fragile. Jacob, Amelia said softly, steady though her heart raced. I don't know what is true, or what is only venom. But I know Lydia needs you. And Puku, you don't have to stand alone. His gaze fell to her hand upon him. For the first time, he did not pull away. He let it rest there, gave the smallest nod, as if admitting to himself what he had denied for years, that another hand could share the weight. Beside them, Lydia rubbed her eyes and whispered, I don't want Pa or Miss Amelia to go. I want us to stay. The child's words, simple and unguarded, bound the three of them tighter than any oath. Amelia's fingers pressed gently into Jacob's arm, and for the first time since stepping into Dust Creek, she no longer felt like a wanderer. In the dim light of night, two hands remained together. No vows, no promises, only presence. But sometimes presence alone was strong enough to fracture the walls solitude had built for a lifetime. By late afternoon, the sky above Dust Creek had darkened far too early. Heavy clouds rolled down from the ridges like a black wall pressing into the valley. Wind lashed cold across the parched fields, driving dust into whirling streams. Chicks scattered across the yard, and the horses in the barn screamed uneasily. Amelia was gathering clothes from the line when thunder cracked, a sound that split the heavens apart. She flinched, clutching the damp fabric, then fled for the porch. Jacob stood at the fence, his face tight, eyes fixed on the boiling sky. Storm, he said simply, voice low and raw. Night fell as though a black shroud had been thrown across the land. Rain came down in torrents, rattling the wooden roof with a roar. The house shuddered beneath gusts that howled through every seam. Lydia curled in Amelia's arms, her wide eyes filled with fear. Amelia stroked her hair, whispering, "Only rain, child," though her own heart thudded with unease. Lightning ripped the sky, white fire spilling through the kitchen window. A heartbeat later, thunder shook the glass in its frame. Jacob bolted the doors, heaved more wood onto the fire, trying to hold warmth against the storm. But in the din, another scent crept in, sharp, acrid, wrong. Amelia stiffened. From the window, a red flicker pulsed against the dark. Not lightning, flame. "Jacob!" she cried. "The barn!" They burst onto the porch into sheets of rain. Beyond the yard, the barn roof was ablaze, straw roof kindled by a stray bolt, burning like a beacon in the night. The horses shrieked, kicking against their stalls. "Lord above," Amelia whispered, then ran. "Amelia!" Jacob's roar cut through the storm, but she did not stop. Her skirts plastered to her legs. She tore through the mud, driven only by the image of the broodmare heavy with foal, the ranch's only hope for the coming season. To lose her was to lose everything. Heat slammed into her face as she reached the barn. Smoke poured out, choking thick. She seized the latch, searing her palms. Jacob crashed in behind her, voice hoarse. "You'll kill yourself!" He slammed his shoulder into the door. The boards gave way. Smoke billowed, hot and suffocating. Amelia staggered inside. The mare shrieked, trapped behind a half-fallen beam glowing with fire. Without thought, she lunged, gripping the reins. Flames licked at her skirts. The smell of burning cloth stung her nose. Jacob heaved against the smoldering timber, muscles corded, sweat and rain streaming down his face. "Pull her!" he shouted. Amelia tugged, whispering desperately, "Easy now. Out you come." Her hand stroked the mare's neck despite the singed hair. The animal trembled, then yielded, stumbling forward. With a roar, Jacob flung the beam aside, sparks showering. The roof sagged, timbers crackling. "Go!" he bellowed. Amelia dragged the mare through the smoke, bursting into the open as the roof behind them collapsed in a roar of flame. Rain lashed her face, but the air was clean. She led the horse into the yard, Jacob stumbling after, streaked in soot and fire. They fell to their knees in the mud, gasping. The mare stood trembling, eyes rolling, but alive. Amelia lifted her head, hair matted, dress torn, skin blistered where fire had touched her. Jacob knelt beside her, chest heaving, his face dark with ash. His eyes found hers, black and burning with a strange mix, anger, fear, and gratitude. "You near died," he rasped. Amelia's breath shuddered. She still clutched the reins. "And if I hadn't, she would have. You know it." His jaw tightened, no words left. Instead, he reached for her, his hand closing around hers, rough palm enclosing her blistered fingers. They sat in the rain, fire raging behind them, but alive, bound by the price they had paid together. From the porch, Lydia burst out, crying, "Pa, Miss Amelia!" She ran through the mud, flung her arms around them both. Her tears mingled with the storm, soaking their clothes. Jacob pulled his daughter in close, his other arm still clasping Amelia's hand. And so the three of them huddled in the tempest, while the barn blazed like a torch. The storm raged as if to test them, but in the firelight, a truth shone clear. Courage was not only facing death, but holding fast to each other when walking out of its jaws. The storm raged until midnight, wringing its last fury over the Dust Creek Valley before finally loosening its grip. When the last lightning faded beyond the ridges, only a thin, mournful drizzle remained, falling like late tears. The McKinley barn lay in ruins. Charred beams toppled, the thatched roof collapsed, smoke curling from embers that still smoldered. The night wind carried the acrid stench of loss. Amelia sat on the porch steps, her burned hand bound in a strip of scorched cloth. She did not complain. Lydia dozed against her shoulder, spent from crying. Out in the yard, Jacob stood against the blackened wreck, a tall shadow etched in firelight's afterglow. He moved quietly among the ashes, stamping out what sparks remained, a figure of stone yet heavy with silent grief. The wind stirred loose ash. Something solid caught the glow. Jacob stooped, brushing away cinders, and froze. A small wooden box, dark, edges warped by heat, hinge twisted, lay half-buried. His breath caught. It was the box of letters never sent. No, his voice rasped. The box had been kept in the loft, well above the flames, yet the storm had torn it down into the fire's path. He opened it. Most of the letters were charred, edges blackened, words blurred. But one fragment remained, half a page spared. The handwriting, familiar, beloved, struck him like a blow. It was hers. By the wavering lamplight, he read the few words that survived. If anyone finds this, know that death was no accident. No more. The fire had devoured the rest. Jacob stood hollow, the slip trembling in his hand, eyes wide with disbelief. Each word a knife driven deeper. Amelia, after laying Lydia upon a quilt, stepped near. "What is it?" He did not answer at once, only held out the charred page. She read quickly, breath catching. The ink was smeared, the paper brittle, yet its meaning struck like thunder. Her hand shook. "Jacob," she whispered. He turned away, his face rigid, eyes shadowed by something darker than grief. His lips moved, repeating under his breath, "Not an accident. Not an accident." The next words lodged too deep to speak. Amelia touched his arm gently. It could be pain speaking. Words written in suffering, not truth. It could... No! His eyes burned, fierce. I know her hand. I know how she left a warning. She wanted it found. Wanted me to know. For the first time, Amelia saw true fear in him. Not the cold silence, not the hard rage, but the terror of betrayal woven into the very memory he had clung to as sacred. The night wind hissed across the ruins. Ash pattered like dry rain. Lydia stirred in sleep, oblivious to the storm now rising in her own home. Amelia clasped the page tight, her voice steady. Whether truth or phantom, you cannot let it swallow what still lives. Lydia needs you, and you are no longer alone. Jacob looked at her then, not as an intruder into his grief, but as the only witness to a secret now laid bare. His voice cracked. "Amelia, if her death was touched by another hand, then that hand still walks free. And we..." He drew a long breath. "We are not safe." The half-burned page trembled in Amelia's grasp, ash falling like black snow between them. She felt it too, a shadow not yet named, an old treachery dragged into the light by storm and fire. Dawn crept gray and thin poisson across the horizon. painting the ruins in cold blue. Amid the ashes they stood together, a man haunted by the past, a woman cast here by cruel chance, bound now by the charred scrap of warning between them. Amelia drew breath, met his gaze. If there was a hand in it, we'll find it. But tonight, at least, we've endured. Jacob did not answer, only inclined his head, then set his hand upon her shoulder. The weight of it was heavy, yet real, and for the first time, Amelia no longer felt like a guest beneath this roof. She was part of its secret now, part of a family standing in the ruins, waiting for the dawn to show both truth and danger. The days after the storm and the half-burned letter seemed to give the McKinley house a different breath. The ashes of the barn still smoldered outside, a reminder of what they had endured. Yet inside the walls, something had shifted. Not in loud declarations, but in the smallest of gestures, in glances no longer turned away. Jacob was quieter still, but less closed. He did not suddenly become open or warm, yet when Amelia set breakfast, he placed a jug of fresh milk on the table rather than leaving her to fend alone. When Lydia giggled at the sound of Amelia reading aloud, he lingered longer in the doorway, eyes softened as though reminding himself the sound had returned, and it was worth keeping. One evening, Amelia came into the kitchen after folding Lydia's quilt. 2 bowls of soup already waited on the table. Jacob stood awkwardly beside them, sleeves rolled, dust of the day still clinging to his shirt. He didn't look at her, only muttered, "I cooked tonight." Amelia blinked, surprised. Never since her arrival had Jacob prepared a meal. She sat, tasted, and let a small laugh escape. Too much salt, but it carried an earnestness no recipe could fix. "Not bad," she whispered. Jacob's eyes flicked up. The corner of his mouth twitched, almost a smile. Then he only nodded and ate in silence. For Amelia, that moment held more weight than 1,000 words. Late in spring, Lydia came running inside, clutching a small box. "Pa said to give this to you," she cried, eyes shining. Amelia opened it. Inside lay a simple wooden ring, smooth and warm with carved grain. She lifted her gaze to the porch where Jacob stood, broad frames stiff, his work-worn hands clasped tight. He stepped forward, his voice rough, chiseled like stone. "I do not give promises lightly. I am no man of ease or gentle ways, but I will learn to be worthy of the kindness you've shown us." Her chest tightened. No finery, no grand vows, only a confession and a vow plain as earth. Yet to her, it was the truest proposal she could ever be given. Lydia clapped her hands, laughing. "Miss Amelia will stay. She'll be my mama forever." Amelia looked down at the ring, then into Jacob's eyes no longer turned aside, but open with a new light. She nodded softly. "Yes, I will stay." Jacob exhaled, as though a burden long carried slid from his shoulders. He slipped the ring onto her hand, the movement clumsy but solemn. For the first time, Amelia saw him smile, shy, fleeting, but bright enough to warm the whole house. A year later, Dust Creek was no longer the cold station where Amelia had once been abandoned, but the little town tied to her every step toward home. That morning, Jacob took Amelia and Lydia into town, all 3 dressed in their best. Amelia wore her mended blue dress, Lydia's hair tied with a white ribbon, and Jacob buttoned into a stiff-collared shirt that made him look both proud and uncomfortable. They entered the photographer's studio. The man arranged them, Jacob in the center, Lydia perched on his knee, Amelia beside him, with her hand upon the child's shoulder. "Hold still," the man called cheerfully. The shutter flashed. In that instant, Amelia felt warmth spread through her, not from firelight, but from the closeness of arms and smiles around her. A week later, the photograph hung in the shop window. Townsfolk of Dust Creek passed and saw Jacob McKinley, Amelia Rowan, and little Lydia. Not a widower, not a stranger, not a motherless child, but a family. When Amelia paused before the portrait, her heart swelled with a simple, lasting truth. After all the years of being left behind, she had finally found where she belonged. That night, as they gathered by the fire, Lydia fell asleep in Amelia's lap while Jacob sat across, his eyes softened by the quiet glow. His voice broke the hush, firm and low. "We have lost too much, but now I will not lose anything more." Amelia did not answer. She only placed her hand upon the table. His rough hand reached, covered it, held fast. In the hush of the kitchen, filled with the scent of wood smoke, they sat together, not in the silence of grief, but in the silence of belonging, where ashes had become a hearth, and three hearts had become one. That night in Dust Creek was strangely clear, as though the land itself, after so many storms, had finally allowed a hush to settle. The wind drifted soft, carrying the green scent of grass just sprouting after the heavy rains. In the small kitchen, the fire glowed steady, shadows leaping gently across the wooden walls. Lydia slept soundly in the adjoining room, her breath even, hair spread loose across the pillow. Amelia sat alone at the long table, lamplight falling over a blank page. The quill trembled faintly in her hand, as though hesitating at what needed to be written. She had often put her thoughts into words when sorrow grew too heavy, but tonight was different. Tonight she wrote not to drive away sadness, but to preserve what she had finally found. Her pen moved slowly. "I once thought myself abandoned. Train after train passed, and I remained the one waiting for a name that never existed. Yet all that waiting was not in vain. It carried me here, to this place at the very moment I was meant to arrive." She paused, drew in a long breath, then continued. "Andrew Collins never was, but Jacob McKinley is, and Lydia, the child in boots too large for her feet, was the hand that pulled me back from the edge. I did not come to Dust Creek to be the wife of some stranger's promise, but to become part of this family, a home I never dared to dream." Ink spread into the fibers of the page like warmth into her chest. None of us must wait at the station anymore. No more sitting on cold benches for trains bound backward. Dust Creek is no longer a stop on my journey. It has become the end of it. A home. Her eyes blurred. The old years rushed back. The scorn in strangers' eyes, the pity in their whispers, the hunger at the depot. All of it now seemed only a road leading to this moment. A quiet night, in a lit house, a child's breathing in the next room, and a man sitting silently just beyond the porch. The hinge creaked. Jacob stepped in, shoulders still scented with wood smoke. He paused at the sight of Amelia bent over the page. "You're still awake?" His voice was low, stripped of its former roughness. Amelia looked up, smiling faintly. "Just a few lines. Old habit." He nodded once, pulled out a chair on the porch, and sat. Amelia folded the letter, set aside her pen, then followed him. Above them the sky opened wide, scattered with silver stars. a river of light spilling into eternity. They sat side by side, not touching, not speaking. The silence between them was no longer heavy, but whole. The silence of people who knew words were no longer needed. Jacob turned slightly, catching her with the corner of his eye. "Thank you," he said, nothing more. Amelia smiled, not asking for what. She knew. It was thanks for staying, for not walking away into the dark, for turning ashes into warmth. She leaned her head gently against his shoulder. Jacob did not move away. His hands rested on his knees, rough but trembling, and they remained like that beneath the stars. In her heart, Amelia whispered the closing truth. No one in Dust Creek waits alone anymore. For what made this story beautiful was not storms, nor fire, nor old secrets, but the moment one soul discovered she no longer had to wait alone. Amelia had found a family among ruins. Jacob had learned to open his heart, not with fine vows, but with calloused hands that knew how to hold. And Lydia, the little girl in the big boots, had given them both the chance to become one. Dear friends, at any age we long for a hearth, a shoulder to lean upon, a place where waiting and loneliness ends. If this story stirred a memory, a face, or a turning in your own life, share it in the comments below. Your words may become someone else's warmth. Please press like, subscribe, and leave a few lines of your heart. Each week, we'll bring you more tales from the Wild West, where love may come slow, but when it comes, it stays.